Yes. Week 5 is in the books. College football. Let's talk about it. So, everybody came into the weekend. This was sort of similar to week 3, where there wasn't the standout games. We just came off of the games last week: Ohio State, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, and Bama. Just all these games that just got us prepared for more college football. But then this week, we had Utah and Oregon State Friday night. Of course, the Beavers came through 21-7 and knocked off the Utes. Still no Cam Rising. Utah still can't move the football, still can't score. We knew that. NC State and Louisville, I know a lot of people probably didn't like it. Defensive struggle, that's my thing. 13-10, Louisville pulled that out, keeping my TCU dream alive. They got Notre Dame coming in this week, so that'll probably be the end of their chapter. But, BYU and Cincinnati was a pretty good game. But it just wasn't the names that everybody gets excited about. So first and foremost, before we get into Notre Dame and Duke, let's just make sure, we hope Riley Leonard is okay. They say he's only going to miss 3 to 4 games. I thought it was going to be worse than that by his reaction. Great sportsmanship by Sam Hartman. We saw him go over to Riley Leonard and check on him and talk to him, give him some words of encouragement. You love to see that. But let's look at Duke. So before we get into that, so Duke's on a bye this week. Then they host NC State next week. Then they go to Tallahassee. They go to Louisville. And then potentially Riley Leonard would be coming back for a Thursday night game against Wake Forest, coming off of the short week. Well, that's going to be the tough part about it. They play Louisville on the 28th, play Wake on the 2nd. If not that game, then they get the long rest, and then they play North Carolina the week after in Chapel Hill on November 11th, Veterans Day. So that will be the 9-day rest coming off the Wake Forest game. But where did it go wrong for Duke? They had 2 turnovers. They didn't force any turnovers. So that's number one. You got a better team coming into your place. You need turnovers. When they played Clemson, that was the thing. Muffed punts, interceptions, fumbles in the red zone. So Notre Dame didn't comply with that. Now, my thought coming into the game was Notre Dame can't let Ohio State beat them twice, meaning that they can't be hungover. They can't be heartbroken. We know that they might have won that game if they had 11 men on the field. But, you can't cry over spilled milk, and Duke was formidable enough to knock them off, So 4th and 16, Sam Hartman, the old KG vet, runs for 17 yards, keeps the game alive, and Audric Estime takes it 30 yards with 31 seconds left to put the game away. Duke had one more chance, and then obviously that didn't work out for them. So Notre Dame ends up pulling out the win in Durham. College game day, great scene because, this was the first time in school history that college game day went there. And I love that kind of stuff. It's easy to go to A&M and Bama. It's easy to go to Florida, Tennessee. It's easy to go to Florida State, Miami. But I love when they go to the little guys like this. A couple of years ago, they went to Jackson State. They go to Harvard, Yale every so often. That's the kind of stuff that I like. That's representative of what I love about college football. But Duke had 30 more rushing yards on 8 attempts than Notre Dame did. So Duke didn't get beat from the standpoint of Notre Dame just dominated. These were 2 great lines in the trenches, taking it out on each other. The big nasties getting it on, but Notre Dame was able to outlast Duke. And then we went on over to Oxford. You talk about defense optional. Man, I tell you, LSU and Ole Miss, even though I'm the defensive guy, this was a fun game. Jaden Daniels, his defense is going to let him down because he's putting up Heisman numbers. I still don't think he's the greatest quarterback or anything like that. I think he might be slightly overrated, but I can't argue with the numbers, right? So Malik Neighbors, didn't score a touchdown finally, after the tear that he's been on, 8 catches for 102 yards. I blinked. Ole Miss was up 21-7. I blinked again. It was 31-28 at halftime. Both teams had combined for 700 yards, ended up finishing the game over 1,300 yards. This was not the SEC football of your granddaddy, but it was still a great game. Lane Kiffin finally gets the win against a big name opponent, against a big time ranked opponent. It was the highest scoring game in FBS this year. The highest game in the total series between LSU and Ole Miss. This was 112 points. So I don't know. 114 points. Sorry. But Jackson Dart to Trey Harris with about 39 seconds left from 13 yards out. And the first thing I thought to myself was, why'd you score so quickly? Or why'd you hold it for the last second field goal? But we know we've seen kickers miss kicks. We've seen kicks get blocked. So I guess I'm okay with the score. LSU came right back down the field and had a chance. But it fell short. Jackson Dart, 26 of 39, 389 yards. He had 50 yards rushing as well. Jaden Daniels, I mentioned his numbers, 27 of 36 for 414, 4 touchdowns, and he rushed for 99 yards. What did I talk about? If Ole Miss would have been able to run the ball on Bama, they could have went into Tuscaloosa and did what a lot of people thought they could do. But Quinshon Judkins, 33 carries, 177 yards. Now, Ole Miss, you got him going. I got one more player for you to get going. Zachary Franklin, transfer from UTSA. He only had 1 catch for 8 yards in that game, but he is a great receiver. And, over the next couple of weeks, you got Auburn, you got Georgia. Now's the time to start figuring this stuff out. So Lane Kiffin for the future. See what happens when you exercise a little discipline. If you'd have kept your mouth shut against Bama, you might have walked out of there with a victory. I didn't hear much from Lane Kiffin this week, and look at this. His team showed up to play. 14 touchdowns total in this game. I want to know from you, did you like it? Or is this not the SEC that or is this not the football that you like? So tell me how you feel about that in the comments. Then you go out to Boulder, the early game, Colorado and USC. Oh, Caleb Williams with 6 touchdowns. I love Shedeur Sanders, but they are not the same. Now, USC took their foot off the gas a little bit. They were up 41-14. We thought this was going to be just like Oregon all over again, but Colorado did not give up. You got to give them credit for keeping it alive. Shedeur Sanders, 30 for 45 with 4 touchdowns and a pick. But it all comes back to the same thing. Shedeur has to fight for his life on every play, getting hit, getting sacked, getting pressured. Sean Lewis, he was a name that I mentioned for the Michigan State job. And I don't know what he was doing the last drive that Colorado had when they scored the touchdown to make it a 7-point game. Final score 48-41. They got the ball back with about 5 minutes left, a little under 5 minutes, and they just kept running the ball. They didn't have any urgency at all. And I don't necessarily have a problem with you running the ball because they were successful, but it was just the point that they just weren't moving quick to the line. After a couple of runs, you would figure a play action here and there. The onside kick was terrible, and Colorado ended up losing 48-41. Like I said, USC's defense is as bad as advertised. Alex Grinch must go. Now, if you're Lincoln Riley, you have to understand, because I figure you're a smart guy, the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Alex Grinch came with you from Oklahoma, and we don't have to get back into your playoff failures in Norman. So last year, you gave him a chance. It was the defense was probably worse than it was this year. They did, Bear Alexander's come in this year and made them somewhat better. But USC, you're not going to the playoff. You're not winning the national title. You're not a national title contender. You got a few weeks, 2 weeks from now or next week, Utah coming in. Then you got Notre Dame on the road. You still got Washington and Oregon to go. Playing that type of defense, you'll be lucky to lose less than 2 games. That's not a prediction. It's just the outlook. But remember, I didn't have USC making the playoff anyway. My playoff was Washington, Michigan, Georgia, and Florida State. So keep your eye on that. Let's see what USC can do. So let's go around the nation. So we talked about Oregon State knocking off Utah on Friday night. Silas Bolden, my goodness, did he have a game? 2 rushes for 53 yards and a touchdown, 6 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. He made you say DJ who? Because when he got the ball in his hands, he was electric. He took over that game, and the place was just lit up because Utah, Nate Johnson, 8 for 23, 101 yards. He got knocked out of the game. And, by the time he got knocked out of the game was pretty much over. Like, it was once Oregon scored 14 points, it just felt that the game was over. Like, Utah wasn't going to be able to do anything. And unfortunately for the Utes, we were correct about that. Ray Davis from Kentucky, 26 carries, 280 yards, 4 touchdowns against the vaunted Gator defense. But no sleep for the weary because you got to go between the hedges this week. So can Kentucky pull it off? I saw a 14.5-point spread. How do we feel about that out there? You guys think Kentucky got a chance? I think Kentucky does not have a chance, because Georgia coming off of the game against Auburn, 27-20. Peyton Thorne had a 61-yard run. Auburn ran for over 200 yards, only had 84 passing yards, and they still lost 27-20 at Jordan-Hare. I know it's a rivalry. I know it's tough. I know Jordan-Hare is a tough place to play. But Georgia, we have seen enough of your shenanigans. We saw you fall behind 14-3 at the half against South Carolina, and then you turned it on in the second half. So I had a thought. And unfortunately, I had this thought because of who I am. But it took me back to 2014. Florida State coming off of the national title win over Auburn. Jameis Winston won the Heisman, come back the next year, went undefeated during the regular season, but there were a lot of games. There was a Louisville game where if it wasn't for Dalvin Cook, the dream would have ended then. There were games where Florida State would fall behind by 2 scores, and then they would just pull it out their ass, literally. And then they got to the playoffs, and we saw how it all fell apart against Oregon. I think Georgia is falling down that same path. We saw them fall behind the South Carolina. We saw UAB give them some issues in the first half. Yeah, they're coached by Trent Dilfer, but so what? They got Auburn. They were down 10-0. And then like this game, like literally Auburn took the lead into the fourth quarter, 17-10. And if it wasn't for Brock Bowers, we would be sitting up here having a whole different conversation. We would have started off this show talking about Georgia and not in a good way, right? So Mississippi State, I'm tired of hearing about how tough the SEC is, how tough the SEC West is. Mississippi State has not beat Alabama since 2007. And a few years ago, you'll hear me say this a lot, so I apologize in advance. But everybody said Cincinnati didn't deserve to be in the playoff. That same season, Alabama went into Mississippi State, cowbells and all, and won 49-9. This week with Jalen Milroe not even throwing 15 passes, Alabama beat Mississippi State by 23. Stop telling me how tough Mississippi State is, okay? That's first and foremost. Second of all, congratulations, Mississippi State. You threw your first touchdown against Alabama since 2014, completed by a guy named Rain Dakota Prescott. That's how long it's been since you've thrown a touchdown pass. And that's a team that had Mike Leach, rest in peace, as their coach. Make it make sense. I'm done with the Mississippi State. Speaking of Bama, it's that week. It's that week. 2 years ago, Kyle Field exploded. Haynes King, we thought he was going to be a star. They kicked the field goal, beat Alabama 41-38. Last year, Bama was favored by 24 and a half. Everybody said, oh, this is going to be the ass kicking. Jimbo talking all the trash during the recruiting season and all this. And watch how, look how God does his work and all that. And then it came down to the last play. And depending on if you want to believe Alabama players or not, the reason that didn't work out for A&M is because they saw or heard Jimbo say Evan Stewart's name, meaning that the ball was going to go to Evan Stewart on that play from the 2-yard line. Now, you and I both know Evan Stewart was going to get the ball just because he's the A&M's best receiver. But according to the Bama players, they were tipped off that it was going to go there. So A&M fell 2 yards short last year in Tuscaloosa, 24-20. Back at Kyle Field this year. Do I smell an upset? Do I smell it? But Carson Beck, back to Georgia for a second. I was down on Georgia. This was their first road game of the season. I hate it, just like Michigan went on the road. But Michigan passed their test with flying colors, 45-7 over Nebraska. Carson Beck, 23 of 33 for 313, a touchdown and a pick. But like I said, he still needed Bowers to save the day. But, maybe this game will make him better now, so we'll see what happens. We got Red River this week, the Red River shootout. Oklahoma looking for revenge from the 49-0 demolition that they suffered last year at the hands of the Longhorns. Do I smell an upset? Nah, not in that one. I think Texas is probably going to smack Oklahoma around. I'm not sold just yet on Oklahoma. They look good. They look much improved. I like Dylan Gabriel, but I just don't know if they have the horses all across the board to hold up against Texas's pass rush and all that. So we'll see. We'll see. But I'm going with Texas for now. And if you didn't get the hint earlier, I am picking A&M over Alabama. So there's that. Neil Brown, I feel like I talk about him every week. This man then went from the hot seat to probably getting a contract extension. They went into Fort Worth, into Amon Carter, and beat up on the Frogs. They lost players and everything. Redshirt freshman linebacker Trey Lathan, had to stay in town to get surgery on his leg. They lost junior safety Aubrey Banks, got carted out. And that was not enough to deter the Mountaineers. TCU had a chance to tie it up with a field goal late, and it just didn't work out. So congratulations, West Virginia, 4-1. Only loss at Happy Valley. They're not going to win the Big 12. They're not going to make the Big 12 championship game or anything like that. But you just got to give credit where it's due. Neil Brown came into this season a dead man walking, and here we are, 4-1 starting October. Cade McNamara, Iowa, out for the season, it looks like. Not quite official yet, but it looks that way. Lower leg injury as well, his knee. It sounds like, depending on, like, one of those things, depending on who you listen to, there was rumors that he told a Michigan State player, I F my knee up, so we'll see how that goes. Sparty put up the good fight, 26-16, Iowa. So they're back on track to get to the 325-point marker. We'll see what happens. Like, they still got some schedule left, and we'll just have to see. Bowling Green, 38 unanswered points in Atlanta, and they knock off the Yellow Jackets. Now, Brent Key came into this season with some hope that Georgia Tech was going to make a bowl game. He came in 4-4 as the interim last year, taking over a bad team. They got Haynes King as their quarterback, but yeah, they gave up 38 straight to Bowling Green. And thank goodness the ACC got rid of divisions, right? Because like your Miami or, you would have been sitting in a division with Georgia Tech, Pitt, both Virginia schools. And by the way, Virginia Tech just beat Pitt. Like, that would have been an awful division, like outside of North Carolina and Duke, but there you go. But Pitt, they were supposed to be a sleeper in the ACC. As a Florida State fan coming into the season, I heard many prognosticators say that Florida State better watch out for the trip to Pitt, Now Pitt sits 1-4, 0-2 in the ACC, and a loss to Cincinnati at home on the first ACC game ever on the CW. I don't know where it's going wrong. Pat Narduzzi, I thought he was going to be the lead candidate for the Michigan State job. Michigan State might not even touch him at this point. I don't think he's on the hot seat. I think he's built enough at Pitt to at least get another year, provided they don't turn it around this year. So Dana Holgerson, he's probably going to be one of the first coaches fired, along with Tom Allen at Indiana. Coming into the year, the joke was that when West Virginia and Houston played each other, it would basically be loser gets fired. So, but it looks like Holgerson is going to hold that all on his own as they lose again to Texas Tech and their backups, backup quarterback and everything. Time of week, it's time to look at the G5s. Who's going to make the G6, or I'm sorry, the New Year's 6. So, you got undefeated Fresno State, with another, game this week. That's going to be tough. They're going to War Memorial Stadium up in Laramie. Ask Texas Tech about it. So looking at their schedule left, that might be their last obstacle until the Mountain West title game, where they're presumably going to play Air Force, who we'll get to in a second. They get Boise at home, Fresno does. So I think if they can get past Wyoming this weekend, I think that they're locking up their spot in the title game. UNLV has been improved, but I don't think UNLV's there just yet. You got Marshall, the Thundering Herd, undefeated still, knocked off Virginia Tech. They got NC State this week. And you know what NC State has? They have a new quarterback, Brennan Armstrong, benched after the performance against Louisville on Friday night. They're going to turn the keys over to MJ Morris, who, if you remember, he came in for a couple of games last year, came back against Virginia Tech, was down 21-3, came back and led that comeback 22-21, got hurt a couple of games later. So he's back now. But for Marshall, if they somehow get past NC State, they still have to go to South Alabama. They still have to go to Appalachian State. They got Georgia State on the road next week. And then they have James Madison on October 19th. Speaking of the Dukes, James Madison still undefeated. But guess what, folks? I regret to inform you, James Madison is not going to the New Year's 6. James Madison is not going to any bowl as it stands right now because of the stupid FBS transition rules. You remember they were eligible last year record-wise, and they got left out, tried to apply for a waiver, denied. So we'll see what happens this year. But they are not going to the New Year's 6. Then you got Liberty. Liberty, big game against Western Kentucky coming up on the 24th of this month. They have Sam Houston. They're at Sam Houston State this week. That should be an easy win. Sam Houston State can't score. They go to Western Kentucky on October 24th. And then they have a game on November 11th at home against Old Dominion, one of those Virginia battles. Get through that, and they're undefeated. But I think they're going to lose to Western Kentucky, not just because I go there, but I just think Western Kentucky is going to outscore them. And then finally, the Air Force Falcons we mentioned, they're at home against Wyoming next week. So how's that for Wyoming? You get Fresno at home this week, and you go down to Colorado Springs next week with a chance to play spoiler potentially. Beyond that, Air Force is on the bye this week, but on October 28th, they go to Fort Collins, CSU. Remember them? Jay Norvell and the gang. And then on November 24th, they go to Boise. So that's the difference. They go to Boise, Fresno State gets them at home. So as we stand right now, I think Liberty has the best chance to go undefeated, just based off of competition. I think Western Kentucky beats them, but I also think there's a good chance that Fresno could lose to Wyoming this weekend. But for right now, we'll just say Fresno is going to make the New Year's 6. They're in the driver's seat right now. They're also in the top 25. You still got Tulane floating out there with their one loss to Ole Miss without Michael Pratt playing. So at Memphis on October 13th. That should be their last hurdle because UTSA is not what we thought they would be. Frank Harris has been injured. We'll see if he comes back this week. Congrats to the BYU Cougars, becoming the first of the 4 newcomers to get their first Big 12 win. UCF came close against K-State last week. Cincinnati and BYU canceled each other out, but BYU was victorious. Houston is just Houston, but BYU was able to pull it out. But I had to pause there because I thought about Baylor. Down 35-7, come back and beat UCF. Welcome back, Blake Shapen. He didn't play that well, but I think his presence, just old reliable, being steady and everything, just kept the offense in the game. His leadership came through and shown, which luckily they won that game, or else we'd be talking about Dave Aranda, and he might have got fired on the spot. But Timmy McClain, I know you guys have seen it. I know you guys have heard about the highlight and everything. This man ran about 70 yards across the field through the end zone on 4th and 5 to get a conversion, completed a 4th and 17 on 4th down. But of course, came down to the kicker. It's always the kicker, right? Always the kicker. Damn kickers. But Baylor, this is their first win against FBS teams since last November when they beat Oklahoma. So that's a proud program that just, it's been rough, but it's the biggest comeback in school history, and it topped the 61-58 win over TCU, where TCU had a 21-point lead in the 4th quarter. And if you remember, that was the first year of the college football playoff back in 2014. Baylor pulled that win out against TCU. They both finished 11-1. They were 4-5 in the polls respectively, but everybody felt, and this is that old college football argument, right? We felt TCU was better, even though they felt TCU was better, even though Baylor beat TCU head to head. So then the Big 12, they didn't have a championship game at the time because they only had they had less than 12 teams. They had the 10 teams, and the Big 12 commissioner at the time, the former commissioner, Bowlesby, comes out and announces that the Big 12 has co-champions. So, of course, Ohio State goes out 59-0, Big Ten title game over Wisconsin, jump both in the polls. Baylor had played 2 FCS schools that year, but they beat TCU. So strength of schedule just was wacky all the way around. And I just felt they screwed themselves. I thought it was stupid, though, because the Big 12 was the one conference that had a true champion because they played each other. Whereas in some conferences like this year, right? Let's look at Ole Miss. If you're Ole Miss, how upset are you? Because you already have to play A&M, LSU, Bama. Now you add Georgia to the schedule. You know what I mean? Like A&M ain't playing Georgia, LSU ain't playing Georgia, but so that's why I liked that style of determining your conference champion, because everybody played everybody and it wasn't just a money grab in the conference championship game. But but here we are, we're reaching the halfway point of the season, and then real quick, we'll look back at my picks real quick before we get out of here, since we're reaching the halfway point. So in the ACC, I had Florida State beating Clemson in the ACC title game. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Florida State will probably get there, but Clemson already has 2 conference losses at Duke and, of course, at home against Florida State. They still have to play North Carolina and Miami, who are both undefeated right now. Duke lost to Notre Dame, but it is not a conference loss. So if they can hold it down until Riley Leonard gets back, they can make some noise in the race. And then, of course, Louisville is undefeated right now, too, who I announced as my pick to be the next TCU, or the closest thing to TCU as far as a team coming out of nowhere, potentially making the college football playoff, only because of their weak schedule, not because they're a good team. In the Big Ten, I had Michigan over Wisconsin. I think we're still in line for that, both undefeated in conference. I think Wisconsin's season is going to come down to the Iowa game. Obviously Michigan still has Ohio State and Penn State left, and watch out for the Terps. In the Pac-12, I had Washington and Oregon State. So, of course, Washington State screwed that up for me a little bit last week, but Oregon State came back, must win against the Utes. So we'll see how it all plays out. I don't think anybody's getting out of the Pac-12 unscathed, if you will. SEC, I had Georgia over Alabama, so we'll see. I'm picking A&M this weekend, so we'll see. Maybe it'll end up being Georgia and A&M. I would love to see Tennessee and A&M, but they play in a couple of weeks anyway. And then in the Big 12, I had Kansas State upsetting Texas in the Big 12 championship game. So we'll see how that goes. But hey, like, review, subscribe, leave me some feedback in the comments. Let's chat, let's argue, let's have some discourse. Holla at your boy. 25 Sports Reports is ordered. Out.